It's time to get the season underway. Tough conditions. Welcome to full race coverage of the men's second and third cap race at the first round of the Odd Down Winter Series in 2022. Crosswinds, rain, tough conditions at Odd Down is a staple of the Winter Series, but it often gives us really good racing. So fingers crossed that the riders put on a show today as they take the start for what will be a 35-minute plus 3 laps and round the 1.5 kilometre circuit up in Bath at the top of the hill, exposed to the crosswinds, expecting a crosshead up the finish straight and then crosswinds down in the bottom part of the circuit today. We've got full race coverage, we've got cameras positioned around the circuit. There's a couple of the cameras that perhaps suffer from some gremlins as a result of the weather. So you will notice some fades across the screen for anywhere we jump between scenes. But apart from that, we have uninterrupted coverage of the duration of this race. And we will be looking to see who the first riders that reach out stretch their legs in 2022 and see how the rest of the pack is feeling. You can see the cameras capturing the blustery and wet and cold conditions of the day quite nicely. It's a challenging environment, but it's the Winter Series, and that is surely what you expect racing at the beginning of January. So as the riders are just about to sweep round the final turn back onto the finish straight to complete their first lap, it is in this section just here, coming up the finish straight, that the strongest kind of headwind will be felt, coming slightly from the rider's left-hand shoulder. So as you can see already, the bunch kind of fanning across the road. The riders don't really want to be working too hard into that headwind at this early stage, trying to conserve some of that energy as they make their way up the finish straight. It's a short race by certainly professional standards or even domestic racing standards, but this early in the season, 40 minutes can feel like a long time, and looking like they're keen to get things underway. Moving up on the left-hand side into the wind, not phased by that headwind at all. It is one of the junior riders, Matt Gilmore, VC Venter, is the first rider to hit out in earnest, put a bit of an impetus behind the bunch and see how everyone's winter training has been going. So Matt Gilmore leads us round the top hairpin for the beginning of lap number 2. He's just put a little move into that little headwind section, and he's just starting to string the bunch out. You can see on a circuit like Odd Down with the corners coming frequently how long that bunch can get and how far back in the group riders can still be completing the corner when the riders up the road are well up to speed heading down the road. So it can be very challenging. You can see already that little move from Matt Gilmore has stretched that bunch out. The wet weather only exacerbates that effect, and then eventually with the repeated accelerations, the repeated lengthening of that group, we can eventually see the elastic snap and riders can break away. We've had lots of races through the day today already. We had the youth races just after midday, under 14s and under 16 boys and girls racing. We had the women's races at about 1 o'clock, fourth cap race and a 2-3 race. We've had the fourth cap men, and this is the final race of the day, the 2-3 men. So far in every single race, breakaway has succeeded. So will that trend hold true in the final race of the day, or will the size of this group cause the sprinters to have their day and make it very difficult for the breakaway artists to get clear? It has proved challenging for Mr. Gilmore to get clear. He flicks the elbow, tries to swing off the front as we hit this headwind. You can see the effect of that acceleration, his attack though. He carried that momentum through a lap, and it's already started to put some riders further down the field into difficulty. That group is still pretty stretched down into that headwind as the impetus just goes out at the front of the race, which will give the riders a little bit further back the chance to slide back up into the group. It would be a welcome respite for them. However, no rest for the wicked. It's one of the other junior riders, no respite given by Tom Adby, the Bristol Cycling Development Squad rider. He has gone over the top of that, making the most of that lull in the pace as we head into the headwind, and he now, at the beginning of lap 3, charges off round the bends on the circuit to try and get clear. So the next rider to go clear, little acceleration from Matthew Gilmore, didn't really create a huge amount of separation, but put some strain to that bunch, and now Tom Adby is looking to do the same thing. You see that long line as they sweep down the descent, bit of a cross tail on this section, it's very fast. But if you can keep that momentum going, you can keep the speed in the group as you come around these, certainly this right-hander here, into the 2 crosswind straights, you can really do some damage. And you see here a perfect example of as Tom Adby and the front riders are well down the straight, the back of the bunch is still only just now coming around that last turn, so they're accelerating up to speed whilst the front of that group races away from them. Little cut across here. Adby is still leading. We've not got full pictures of the bottom of the circuit. That's one of the cameras that's just had a little bit of difficulty. But in that time, Tom Adby is still leading. But it is still only a very, very small gap, a few bike lengths. The pursuing riders have kept him on a short leash, and it looks like, look over the shoulder there, he's called off that attack for the time being. Doesn't want to persist with it into the headwind. So a little bit of a detente. Again, and like I said, another chance for those riders that were on the receiving end further down that line to try and slide themselves back up the group. It's very difficult from there to build the motivation almost to try and get yourself all the way back forward. You can feel just that relief to have survived and avoided getting caught off the back of that group. As you can see, one of the riders from the Avid team there, Jensen Harris, just sliding off the back. It can feel like that relief that you've avoided the drop. But if you're sitting at the back of a group this size on a wet circuit with all these bends, it is only a ticking time bomb, a matter of a few more laps. If another acceleration comes, you can find yourself in a very, very vulnerable position further back. So you've got to not just tag yourself on the back of that group, you've got to try and find the energy, find the motivation to slot yourself further through that group. And it's the riders that we are looking out for, the ones that aren't finding themselves near the back but are able to hold a strong position in the front and be the aggressors, are often the ones that come up best here on this circuit, especially in conditions like we've got today. So we were looking for that next aggressor. It looks like there's a pair of riders just having another nudge of the front, hard to see through the raindrops on the lens down here who they are. We'll see as they come back round whether they have managed to start to build a gap as they continue to put the hurt on the riders further back. There we go, it's Adby again. So it's clearly had a good winter on the track and now is looking to make the most of the early season races to score some points as he continues his progression, hopefully into the Junior National Series, looking for that second cat licence. And he is certainly not holding back here in these early laps, looking to be the aggressor. And it looks like now, as they fold back into the group, it's Carl Jolly, 73 degrees, the next rider to fold over the top as the bunch hesitate into that headwind, and away he goes. And he has got a sizable chunk of a lead already in the first few 100 metres of attack. So he powers on into the headwind. Looks like the response is now coming from the bunch. Adby marking that again, but this is now the first time a measurable gap. We have a second lead, a 1 second lead on the screen, so we have a measurable gap for Carl Jolly. This is going to really put that pressure on further down the order. You can see the long thin line snaking its way around these bends at the top of the circuit, and gaps starting to open up as we look our way down the order. So there goes Jolly, using a bit of the tailwind, a bit of discussion or discontent in the chasing group, deciding how they're going to manage this attack. Will they chase by committee? Will it be someone else trying to get across and trying to get clear of this chasing bunch? You can see that long line. There are gaps now starting to form further down. Still Jolly persists with his 2 second lead. Still that pursuit continues, and there are several bike length gaps, several places on that line. So this is the really dangerous moments. We're 5 laps into this race, still a long way to go. But again, these conditions reward that assertive riding, and it can really put the hurt on the other riders. It looks like Jolly has been brought back. Those gaps still are there in the group. So this is where it's that red zone moment. It's a really a trope that some coaches sometimes put out. This is when it's hard is when you've got to try and attack. And that was certainly a hard moment from Carl Jolly. So if anybody's got the legs here to try and follow that up with a counter attack, it could prove effective. But at the moment, it looks like everyone is just breathing a sigh of relief that is over, and that they are able to roll through together in this large group. You see the group just getting tailed off the back. So a number of riders aren't able, and then with that punishing headwind, you see the flags have kind of calmed down here. Certainly not the worst of conditions. It was windier earlier, wetter earlier in the day. But that headwind is still blowing strong, and the riders in the group can really benefit from the shelter, even as the group stalls. If you're caught in one of these groups off the back, that headwind can be the end of your race. But it does look like that group is just trying to stitch itself together. Will the group, the front, stall for long enough to give them the chance? Doesn't look like it. It looks like it might be Will Jewett on his blue Ridley heading up to lift the pace once again as we turn into that tailwind with the crosswinds coming up. And that makes it all the harder for those riders that got tantalisingly close to catching back on. Now that acceleration of the group will undo all that work and have forced them to chase once more. So Will Jewett, the closest rider to accelerate on lap 6 of the race, coming up to about 1/3 of the distance. So these laps can tick by quite fast. Sometimes you can be begging for it to end though when it's a really hard race in that bunch. So as we work our way through those groups now, look like they have a long, hard chase if they are to get back on. Here's the shot for the bottom of the circuit. First time we've been able to get this camera to show you the pictures from that bottom hairpin. See, it's this is often the windiest part of the circuit down here. You can see the camera getting buffeted slightly in the wind even, but you can see how wet and grey and dark it is on this early January race. And here comes a great example of the bunch getting put in that right-hand gutter as they work their way with this cross tailwind. The speeds are always high down this section, and with that crosswind just whipping across the riders from their left-hand shoulder, it can really tease those gaps open. And if you have a gap, as we discussed, so we saw that group already, as you come up the left-hander onto the finish straight, it can be very, very hard to put it back together unless the bunch really does stall. And it looks at the moment like they are determined not to. Riders starting to do turns in that front quintet or so. And it really is a case here of investing energy to keep the riders that may be on the ropes further back, keep them on the canvas, keep them on the ropes, and not give them the opportunity for respite that will allow them to fold themselves back into the group. So it's investing some energy now to try and maintain the strong position that those riders at the front of the race feel that they already have secured in the first 6 and a bit laps of this race. But we are all still together. And the most meaningful gap was that 2 seconds that Carl Jolly had, but it was only a very short amount of time he was ever given. Riders weren't really interested in allowing him his fun off the bunch. So we are all still together, and it looks like that first kind of battle through that first third of the race to make sure that you weren't caught out in one of those early splits has been resolved by the riders that are in that main group. And with about kind of maybe 10 or so riders now out the back of the 40 or so that started, those 30 riders will be content that has reduced the size of the group to a manageable size. That means that there's a little bit less risk of weaker riders or riders that are struggling to hold the pace, letting gaps go. And it also just reduces the length of that line for the elastic effect we were talking about earlier, that can string things out around these hairpin bends and make it very hard to chase back on. But as we said, 30 riders, it's still a hard chase. 30 riders, especially when the pace is up, can be hard work when it's the front of the bunch is accelerating and you're still making your way around the corner. And it is certainly accelerating now. You can see this starting to tease out another gap halfway down the bunch. Looks like it will get stitched together, no worries, as we come into that headwind section. But again, another match burnt potentially for the riders that are forced to close those gaps. And that's a big part of the skill of learning to race these circuits, is making sure that you're not the one closing the gaps all the time, as we have a really concerted effort here. So this is a full-on attack, no holding back this one. It looks like it's Matt Gilmore again, so he made his early move this time, no messing about. You've got Carl Jolly and then Josh Price, my rider we've not mentioned yet, straight on the wheel. So they are identifying the danger here of this acceleration from Matt Gilmore. It has started to create a substantial gap partway down the group. It looks like there's about 7, possibly 8 riders ahead of that split, and then you've got the rest of the group now. Alarm bells ringing perhaps as they see Matt Gilmore, Carl Jolly, riders that have been up the road already. Up front you've got Josh Price, one of the riders to watch today. Will Jewett, he's been up at the front of the race, and these riders further back now have their work cut out to try and bring back this group of 8 that have started to persevere and get away. And this 8 might swell, but it might have some more success, even if 4 or 5 riders, it might not be all of them. So this is real kind of every man for themselves moments. There's another 2 have got across, so it's now 10 up the road, probably about kind of 15, 20 riders behind. It's a proper split in the group. It's 4 seconds at the moment. It's far from a done deal, but very dangerous moments. As you can see, there's that big gap yawning across. You can almost feel like you can reach out and touch it, but it can also feel like an absolute chasm when you're the one having to chase it across. Here come another couple of riders. Look like they've got the momentum behind them, the speed, as the riders disappear into the murk around that bottom hairpin. There's looked like there's another couple of riders starting to make their way across to that front group. So from 8 to 10, potentially to 12, will this bring itself all back together as the chase by committee, as the riders surge across the gap? No, there is still a substantial gap in the middle there. Those riders in white are still the ones trying to bring themselves across. There's another group of 3, and you can see the damage it's continuing to do further back as riders claw their way across that gap. There's more riders that are absolutely clinging on by their fingernails at the back of the group to try and avoid getting turned over by this real sustained pace. And it's these moves are the real dangerous ones. You've got enough riders up front that can share that workload, keep the pace high, and it doesn't allow that surge stop to that can cause those regroupments. As we can see, another example, it's just come back strung together, and they've got another rider goes over the top on the sheltered side of the circuit, looking to push away. It might potentially be Sam Andrews, the cyclocross rider. He's been doing lots of damage in the Westernly cross races recently. He'll be up for a race, no doubt at all. And again, Jolly now it is that comes to the front once more, and there's more gaps, just a couple of bike lengths, but those gaps are all energy being spent to try and keep this race all together as we approach the halfway stage of proceedings. So a few more riders have been shown the trapdoor at the back of the bunch with that fast lap that was triggered by that move by Matt Gilmore, and then sustained as that group of 8 initially got away, and then as riders clawed their way back across, they kept the pressure on, kept on doing damage to those riders further back, and it does look like we're going to get a regrouping here, but that group is looking a little bit smaller and a lot more battered already after 9 laps of this race. So after 8 and a bit laps of the race, really, we're on lap 9 now. So what, we're down to about 25, possibly 30 riders now in that group. Everyone who was battling in that middle ground to try and get across has got there. Looks like a couple of riders might have gone out the back under the impetus of that move, and perhaps a few more riders who are clinging on at the back are now in survival mode, and that's kind of what you're looking for a little bit with those moves. It might not be the one, but if you're the one, you're the aggressor, you're putting riders into that position where they're just hoping to survive and cling onto the back of the group, they're as good as beaten in that case. And here comes, it looks like, the next move. So have we got a drag race between 2 riders, or is it just rider peeling off the front of the group? So peering through the gloom, that is certainly a high-paced group, but just some small gaps opening up, but no big concerted attack like the one we saw from Matt Gilmore this lap. But he went up into the headwind section. He was shown the sheltered side of the circuit, made the most of it, and dived off to the right to try and create that gap. We have got one of the lap riders getting caught here as the front of the bunch, Carl Jolly, Sam Andrews, it was indeed. Look around. The riders behind will be glad of that, as there's still that gap in the middle of the group. They're still having to stitch this one together. The lack of concerted attack that lap did not mean that they were slow. They came whisking along in that tailwind section, and it will come back together, but it was several laps of hard chasing there for the riders at the back of the group, and the riders at the front will be very content with that, even if they haven't got that definitive split that they were looking for yet. And as the impetus continues, as all that hard work starts to wear in, it's when you've had this sustained period of pressure that the dangerous moves can start to form. So keep your eyes peeled, because we've been right on the limit for quite a while now, and if you've got lots of battered riders, lots of tired riders in there, that creates the opportunities for moves to truly get clear. And it looks like we have our next candidates pushing away into the tailwind section. Going to try and use the crosswind here to try and kind of sustain that gap. He's got Will Jewett chasing the group. I can't quite see who's a rider all in black, so difficult to identify at the best of times, but certainly not with the camera quality like we've got here. But a nice gap already, 4 seconds, probably the biggest lead that anybody's had so far in this race, so we'll see who it is when they emerge from the murk at the bottom part of the circuit. And they'll be very content. That's a very solid start for a gap, and they'll be probably looking at this stage with still, 9 laps or so to go, that they will be saying, actually, do I think I could do this on my own? Well, probably a little bit of support, a little bit of help would not go amiss. Trying to battle on your own is against this wind is always going to be a very tall order. So there goes the rider. It looks like it might be Tom Price, Josh Price, we mentioned earlier, his younger brother, and we have another rider coming across, so that help we were talking about may just appear. So as we swing up to the headwind, we'll have a bit of a clearer picture, try and identify it. The gap is now starting to go out, so the bunch has given these riders that little bit of space, and let's see who it is. It is indeed Tom Price, Reflex Racing, and he's been joined by Carl Jolly, who has been on the attack already several times today. He had his gap earlier on. It's Sam Andrews and one of the riders from Primera, as well as Josh Price, Tom's brother, who are at the front of the group. Will Josh and Tom have a bit of an agreement, and Josh might not chase this one down, which would leave it down to the other riders at the front of this race. It looks like Sam Andrews persevering off into that gap to try and get himself across. It does tick down a second, so we were at 6, it's down at 5. So that impetus of that chase from Sam Andrews is starting to bring that pair of riders back. But one rider is one thing, but 2 is infinitely, well, doubly more dangerous, I guess. And we have 2 riders here with a lot of reason to work together. It's 2 riders that have proved their strength in the past, and they will be a tough proposition to bring back, I think, here. But it's Sam Andrews. If anybody can, he can. dominating the cross races, and behind you've got Primera still working hard. Will Jewett from JRC Interflon is one of the other riders that's been very prominent at the front, trying to stitch this one back together, but those efforts are currently proving in vain. 7 seconds is now the gap, so that leading duo started to extend their lead on the bunch. Sam Andrews in the middle. Will he be able to get himself across to that leading pair? This looks like a very, very, very dangerous move that is developing here, and Sam Andrews will have identified that, but he's got himself what the French call potato hunting. He's got himself in that middle. He needs to get across soon, otherwise his individual effort will start to count against the 2 riders in front as well as the bunch chasing behind. So the gap is holding 7 seconds. So it is certainly still a tempting, a tantalising prospect for anybody that thinks they can jump across. They are still well within sight, but you can see just through that murk, taking turns, changing turns, these 2 riders know they have to commit to this move now if they've got a chance of making it succeed. They've been out front for nearly a lap. That's 2 and a bit minutes riding, and so as this time ticks by, they get more and more invested in this move, and they get more and more reliant on it working, and it looks like 8 seconds. It is starting to work. So where will they be as we make our way round into lap number 12? The pair of riders, 8 seconds. Sam Andrews swings over to the side. It looks like his solo chase of that breakaway has been ended. He has thrown in the towel, and it also looks like Primera, Will Jewett, they're the ones working, but they're looking at each other here, and they're starting to ask the question, are we going to get him across here? Have we got what we need to make it? It's still only kind of 1, 2, possibly 3 riders working, so the riders up front, the pair, will like that balance, that equation, as Andrews does get brought back into the fold by the main group. And those 2 riders are now able to look across the circuit at the group and will now be able to start to judge that gap, and they'll be very satisfied indeed as they can start to manage their effort into transitioning into that long sustained effort from the initial surge to build that gap. So as the riders swing round, it's Primera again, riders in blue, doing a lot of the work on the front here. They've got numbers, they've got at least 2 or 3 riders in the group, so some real emphasis on them to try and bring this back. Also looking at riders like Adby and Gilmore, those riders that had been aggressive early on. Will Jewett was another one that had put in an early move and now is finding himself having to try and rectify this first real true sustained breakaway from Tom Price and Carl Jolly. Carl Jolly, of course, himself very, very active early on. Tom Price, the first time he'd really put his nose in the wind was that attack. He was the one that triggered the move. It was Jolly that came across to him, showing his racing nous here. Tom Price making one move and making it stick. The move did come, as we were discussing, kind of after a really sustained period of pressure. It was a number of riders kind of keeping the pace high. We had that near split of 8 riders at the front that meant that lots of riders were kind of desperately trying to get themselves back in the group and getting rid of ideas of trying to push forward into breakaways and just trying to survive, and that showed how that pressure was putting riders in the red, and that's proved very effective, very important for building that lead that these 2 riders have managed to get. And it's now 13 seconds as we head onto lap number 13, and it's nearly the length of the finish straight. It's nearly that full 200 metres or so between that final corner, or just that little rise up out of the final corner to the line. So 200 metres or so will be the mark there from the final cut through that we call it, where the cones are. The riders will be judging for their final sprint, and this will be a really great opportunity here as the riders sweep around that top hairpin, as it's Gilmore trying to get back across that front of the race. The leading pair will see that, they'll see the solo rider. And I think, like with Andrews earlier on in the race, they'll be quite happy. One rider chasing is exactly what those 2 will really want, because it means that they've got the numerical advantage despite the fact they're in a small group compared to that large bunch behind. It needs to be an organised chase here as we are marching through this race. We're past 2/3 distance, and as we go through 2/3 distance, it's going to need something organised to bring the 12-second gap back. But we have some very, very talented young riders. Matt Gilmore, of course, one of those in this race. And we spoke about Sam Andrews had the potential power to try and bring back that duo on their own. Matt Gilmore thinks that he has what it takes. So as he charges off into that gap, will he have what it takes to bring back the pair? There they go, just jumping that bottom part of the circuit. Lost pictures from down there in the rain and the wind at the bottom hairpin once more, as Jolly and Price take that left-hand turn up the little rise towards the finish straight. There's a little group of lapped riders who are in the middle between the breakaway and the bunch, and there is it's Josh Price. So Tom Price's brother Gilmore has been brought back, and now Josh Price is the one that is setting off in pursuit of the leaders. So we spoke potentially about an agreement or a détente between the pair of them, but at this stage it certainly looks like Josh is determined that he wants to get across back to the front where his brother is currently riding with Carl Jolly. So here come the duo up the finish straight. Again, you can see the commitment between those two. There's no questions asked here about working to the headwind. They are fully committed to bringing that gap back together. They want to work together, and it looks like Price, so Josh Price, the second of the brothers, is now well on his way into that gap. So as we said a lap ago when it was Matt Gilmore, that leading duo will probably be quite happy with a single rider chasing them down. Tom will probably even be more happy if it's his brother, although of course Josh Price comes with a reputation riding for Spirit BSS as a team, and so both those riders up front will be concerned. They do not want a rider of Josh Price's quality joining them at the front, because it might take their opportunity for a 1 in 2 chance of the win away and stack it in his favour. So they will push on ahead. It has certainly started to bring that gap down this attack. So Josh Price heads off in pursuit of his brother. It's down to 8 seconds. I think the most we had was 13-14 seconds or so of a lead, and we're now back down into single figures. You can see the leading duo at the end of the straight. Josh Price is about halfway down the straight as they make the turn, and now it's Tom Adby and another little group. The splits are forming once again, so the pressure is on this chase from Josh Price. Then you've got Adby and Gilmore. Jewett are the riders in the second, third and fourth place behind Price. So they are the ones that are determined not to let that single rider get away, and this is the defensive riding that can sometimes start to play into the hands of our breakaway as we lose more pictures from the bottom of the circuit. We're stuck on the top part, but as these two riders rebuild that lead, it's back up another 3 seconds. You'll have Adby, Gilmore and Jewett will chase down Tom Price, who was starting to chip away at that gap. And as they get across that wheel, they'll go, okay, phew, we've made it. That intermediate step becomes the finish line, and then as they make that catch, the whole group can stall and end up racing for third once again. So as Jolly and Tom Price, they are no longer racing for third at any stretch. It's all in for the win. Those two riders are fully committed here. They've been in this breakaway for a substantial number of laps. They went away about half distance after a real long spell of aggression, and their gap is back out to 13 seconds as Price is brought back. Jewett, Adby and Gilmore are all back in the fold in that group. Those riders that were leading that pursuit in the middle of the pack, and that will again play into the hands of Jolly and Price up front, who will have sustained that consistent tempo as the surge came behind, the gap came down, but now that the bunch has let off the gas a little bit, that gap has started to rise up again, and 13 seconds is a gap with 4 laps to go that those front two riders will be very content with indeed, as it's Jewett and Adby once again on the front. Same names, you can see the pattern that emerges in races who are down. It's the same kind of protagonists throughout. However, we of course, the finish is where the prizes are given out, and maybe some of those riders that have been keeping their powder dry, hiding in the group, will mop up the results as the riders that have been working in the wind all the way through the race have spent too much of their energy. 15 seconds is the gap on lap number 15, so that is a still growing gap. And those front two, now is when the mentality shift might start to arrive. So they've been working incredibly hard collaboratively. They can't afford to start messing around yet, but as the gap looks more and more secure, that's where they may start to look at one another and go, okay, what can I get away with here? What turns can I skip? What energy can I save for the finish? Because they won't be content with settling for second at this point in a group of two, with them up the road and the laps counting down towards the finish here. So there go our front two, just out of shot, and it's Tom Adby again. So we spoke about him working the front. He has been given his space here, and off he goes in pursuit. So is this in pursuit of the leaders, looking to try and snatch victory away from either Tom Price or Carl Jolly, or is this just looking to secure third place without the need for a bunch sprint? So away goes Tom Adby. A very handy looking move, and he has got himself a substantial lead over the bunch. So he's got himself a handful of seconds. He can't see the leaders up ahead at the moment, but at this stage he will just be getting his head down and working hard into that gap to try and A, secure that gap to the group behind, or B, if he can get close to the leaders, even better. It's Gilmore on the front of the bunch, trying to bring back his frequent rival, Tom Adby. They'll have raced together all the time during their time as youth racers, and now they're going head to head as juniors in amongst the adult second and third cats. So we will wait to see where Adby is as he comes around the turn. Continuing with their mission are Jolly and Price, and you can see in the distance there Adby coming around that corner, so it does look like he started to chip into that gap perhaps, but the front two, again, that equation 2 versus 1, even if Adby starts to close in, they'll be quite content. They've got a good opportunity to hold him off, and so 3 laps to go is shown to the riders, so it's 35 minutes plus 3 laps for the race. It's worked out as 19 laps of racing, and they have 3 laps to go, so probably in the region of 6-7 minutes or so of racing remaining, depending on how tactical things get at the front, as we have the leaders passing on the left hand side of the screen. Tom Adby chasing solo. He is the 3rd place rider on the road at the moment, and then we have the pack, which is down to about 15-20 riders behind him, circling like sharks, and it does still look like a solid gap for Adby. Is this the bunch hanging him out to dry and just biding their time to make the catch, or have they come up with no answers to that move from the youngster? And it looks like one person that might have the answer is Matt Gilmore, again active all race long as the front pair sweep round to the right into that next kind of cross headwind section. We'll wait for Adby and then potentially Gilmore and the bunch to appear on the right side of the screen here behind the leaders. You can still see it's a very, very solid gap indeed, as there goes Adby. He still has a lead. What is the shape of the bunch behind? There goes Gilmore, continuing that chase, and you see he's caused another split. Josh Price is on the back of that group. We have a few bike lengths gap back from the front kind of 5 or so riders that are chasing down Tom Adby. So Gilmore's pressure is starting to put more cracks and strain into the group. Will he be able to bring back Adby? Will they be able to bring back this pair who are just navigating their way past a group of riders who are off the back? So they're going to lap them for the first time this race as they start to come up to 2 laps to go. And still Adby is away on his own, so it looked like Gilmore was making some real rapid progress closing down that gap, but as things stand, Adby has a substantial lead still, and it looks like the bunch are starting to swing across that road into the headwind, so this straight will be super important for him. If he can persevere that gap, if the bunch slow down, it will give him the impetus needed perhaps for that last 2 laps. If, as Josh Price seems to be doing at the moment, the bunch can keep him close, that energy he's expending into this headwind will potentially count against him towards the finish. So 2 laps to go. The leading pair just leaving the screen on the left hand side. Adby heading up into that headwind, up towards that final corner, and the bunch is now in one line, which means the pace is up, and it does look like that gap has come down significantly since the last lap. It looks like it's Josh Price that's done a large amount of that work. Adby having to persevere with this now. He's really committed to this move. Will his mind start to move towards the sprint finish, or will he go all in on holding off that pack and Josh Price and be done with the sprint? What will be, well, looks like Price wants to be done with the sprint himself. He's chasing after Adby, and he's starting to gap the rest of the bunch in that pursuit. One of the riders, I think it's one of the Welsh riders' jerseys, is on his wheel. A couple of Welsh riders looking to bring back Tom Adby from Bristol, and the bunch continues to shrink as the leaders. 2 laps to go at the moment, but they are approaching the final lap, and for the first time, it seems like all race well. Tom Price is now continuing to batter on with this. He's not letting the impetus drop, not letting the pace drop. They haven't really started looking at each other, but it does look like there's a little bit less force going through the pedals there from Price than we've seen previously heading into that headwind. So they are starting to consider their options, looking into that sprint finish. You can see now the wind is back up, so those flags were blowing very gently towards the start of the race, but the wind is blowing across now, and you can see a little bit of looking at each other, a little bit of gamesmanship for that front pair. They're making the assessment. Does that gap behind solid? Can we start to play some tactics, or do we need to continue to make sure we secure that lead? That's a group of lapped riders, so they aren't a threat to the leaders. They will be we can stay out of the way of the mix of this final sprint. It looks like Adby has now been caught, so Price and Gilmore at the front next to Tom Adby. They have brought him back, the rider from Bristol. It doesn't look like that bunch is interested in chasing down the front pair, so the front pair starting to play a bit of cat and mouse. You've got Jolly on the front at the moment, Price on his wheel, and then Price slides by into the headwind. So who will want to lead this out? Who will be looking to jump from behind? We will lose the picture on the bottom part of the circuit, but the riders will be back on the finish straight before we know it, and then we'll be able to take a look at this final sprint between Jolly and Price. Early season, Hard to know where riders' form is at. This will be a good first indicator. Very open sprint though, and neither rider will want to give an inch as the group swings around that right-hand themselves. Here they come, right, so onto the final straight, the final lap. We have our breakaway pair. It looks like it's Price on the front as they come up the rise. He's trying to keep himself to the side of the circuit so he can keep an eye on his rival, trying to look behind to see where Jolly is. When will Jolly make the move? They've gone through 200 metres to go, and Jolly, here we go. He takes his kick on the right side. He managed to find a small gap on the sheltered side, so he's come round Price. Will Price have enough to come back at him in the final metre of the sprint? It looks like Jolly is going to hold him off by a good solid bike length and a half or so. So comfortable win in the end for Carl Jolly. Made that look very easy. A cleanly executed sprint. Tom Price will be frustrated, but will be content with his second place. And here comes the bunch. It looks like you've got Gilmore, Adby and Josh Price at the front, and it's Josh Price that comes through to take third. Matt Gilmore solid in fourth, and then a blanket finish for fifth and sixth just behind. So a solid breakaway. We said that the breakaways are taking it early in the day, and we have another successful move. Carl Jolly from 73 Degrees taking the win. Tom Price from Reflex Racing in second, with his brother Josh mopping up third place from the bunch behind. This has been the first round of the Odd Down Winter Series. We hope to see you up at the circuit soon, and hope you've enjoyed coverage of the men's 2 and 3 race.